Okay, here we are on the second part of lesson 2. We just read the last, 5 pages of the lesson. And so now we're going to fill in the blanks for our notes. The first part of the lesson we read just now was modeling inheritance. And so number 1 says, in a situation based on chance, such as flipping a coin, the chance of getting a certain outcome can be represented by a ratio such as 50-50 or 1-to-1. Number 2, actually before we go on to number 2, we can also represent it with percents. So a 50-50 ratio would be 50% to 50%, right? So you have a 50% chance of one or the other thing happening. Sometimes we have a ratio of 3-to-1. That would be a 75% to 25% chance. You can also represent these possibilities that we're learning about in the Punnett squares. You can represent them as percents or as ratios. Now let's look at number 2. So a Punnett square is a model a model that is used to predict, and that's the big word here, predict. We're not saying that every one of the possibilities that we come up with in the Punnett square are going to happen. Like, for example, I had 4 children, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to have, of all the gene combinations, I'm going to have one each of all the gene combinations. It doesn't work like that. It just means that for each child, for each offspring that is made, you have a certain percent of that offspring having a particular trait. All right, so to create a Punnett square, first you need to know the genotype of both parents. Letter B, if you count large numbers of offspring from a particular cross, the overall ratio will be close to the ratio predicted by a Punnett square. Number 3, a pedigree is a diagram that shows phenotypes of genetically related family members. And you've seen these pedigrees before. It also gives clues about their genotypes. So the pedigrees are based on the phenotypes or the expressed characteristic, but you can use them to try to help you understand what the genotypes are. So a phenotype will tell us like maybe what possible genotypes could be, and you can use the information on a pedigree to understand that the ancestors are related to the offspring in question, and then they have offspring that have phenotypes as well. So looking at all the phenotypes of the ancestors and the offspring of a pedigree of someone can really help you understand what genotypes they have, and we'll do some more work with that next week. All right, let's look at C. So the complex patterns of inheritance. So alleles show incomplete dominance when the offspring's phenotype is a blend of the parent's phenotypes. That means like if you have a dominant phenotype that's red and a recessive phenotype that's white, the incomplete dominance would show something like a pink. It's a blend of the two. Now, number 2, alleles show codominance when both alleles can be observed in a phenotype. Number 3, unlike the genes in Mendel's pea plants, some genes have multiple alleles. Number 4, ABO blood type is a trait that is determined by multiple alleles. Number 5, polygenic inheritance occurs when multiple genes determine the phenotype of a trait. And we saw this at the beginning of the lesson when we looked at all the different eyes and the eye colors, because human eye color is an example of polygenic inheritance. All right, let's look down at letter D then, genes and the environment. Well, genes are a factor that influences genotypes, but they are not the only factor, not the only factor that affect phenotypes. That's because an organism's environment can also affect a phenotype. For example, the flower color of one type of hydrangea, that's a kind of a, what do they call that? Like a snowball looking bush. You know, the hydrangea looks like it's got big flowers that look like snowballs on it. You know, so the flower color of a hydrangea is determined by the soil in which the hydrangea grows, and in fact is determined by the pH of the soil. Okay, whether the soil is acidic or alkaline. All right, number 3, the last one, it says blank choices can affect a person's phenotype, and really it's healthy choices. It's whether or not you're choosing to do things that are healthy for you. That can really affect things like whether or not you get cancer. So you may have a gene that makes you more vulnerable to cancer, but you can do some things to help mitigate that, the possibility of getting cancer, for example. You may have genes that make you more vulnerable to things like heart disease. But if you're eating heart healthy and you're exercising, that's going to decrease your risks. So there are things that you can do. There are choices you can make to actually change your phenotype.